Hello, students, and welcome to another video today with me, Professor William Wright. Today we are going over chapter 22 and briefly touching on chapter 23 from Living with Art by Mark Getlein. And yeah, we're jumping off of chapter 21, which kind of got us to the up into the 30s, right? Let me go ahead and share, be sure it's all good. I'm just trying to jump right in, trying to get through this in one part. So let's do it. Okay, so chapter 22, from modern to postmodern. Chapter 21 got us to the 30s through the Great Depression and on to the cusp of World War II. And then we're going to kind of just let World War II be its thing. From 1939 to 1945, World War II happens. I guess you could argue it starts in 37, I think. But, with the invasion of Poland in 39, it becomes, it becomes World War II. And then Pearl Harbor happens in 41. And then the U.S. invades Europe in 44, right? And the U.S. has been involved in other parts of the war prior to that. But in any case, World War II ends on August 9th, 1945. The United Nations is founded after this to promote peace because, I mentioned in the last chapter, chapter 21, that 25 million people were killed in World War I. And it made the world go crazy, and they thought it was never going to get worse than this, how horrible. And then the world had gone mad. It was all going to end soon. But then in World War II, 3 times that were killed, and they were like, holy moly, it got even worse. And it's 75 million people are killed during World War II. We also see the dropping of the bomb. And basically, military technology has gotten so far that we will all die if we continue down the path that World War II shows us. And so the United Nations is created. It was already kind of started with League of Nations prior to that, but the United Nations is meant to promote global peace, because if we don't have that, we're all going to blow ourselves up. So in any case, this United States and the Soviet Union emerge after the war. Most of Europe is kind of in shambles. Britain's been bombed. France was taken over and divided between Nazi loyalists and Nazi resistors, right? And then the Nazis invade, and Eastern Europe has the mess of the war between the Russians and the Nazis. Spain is under a fascist dictator. It all just it turns into a mess. And out of this, the Soviet Union and the U.S. end up the big two superpowers. Now, it becomes clear after this that the most interesting art was no longer originating in Paris, but rather was found in New York. I'm going to give Paris the benefit of the doubt in that it was not the city of Paris itself, but France as a whole was kind of blown to smithereens and really dealt a big one. So, I would say we forgive them for the fact that the transfer of artistic culture in the world kind of shifts, at least avant-garde artistic culture in the world shifts to New York. Now, of course, the history of France and in Europe and in art history, it's still obviously very important. But new art, the New Art Center is New York. In any case, got to move on. Abstract Expressionism, also known as the New York School, was the first major avant-garde movement in America. Okay, now we've seen avant-garde before. I mean, it means the cutting edge. It's the people that are pushing the boundary. And the first movement in America that is based in America. Obviously, prior to this, we had avant-garde movements influence America, and they reached America in 1913. But when it shifts to new movements being founded in America, Abstract Expressionism, or the New York School is the first one. They emerge in New York City in the 1940s. They produce large-scale, spontaneous, non-objective paintings and abstract paintings that express their state of mind and were intended to strike emotional chords in the viewer. Yeah, I highlighted non-objective because Jackson Pollock is not an abstract painter. He's a non-objective painter in the strictest sense. Now, obviously, abstract expressionism has a lot to do with abstraction and a lot to do with expressionism, but he is a non-objective painter, and it's all about the emotional and psychological interpretation of artwork that he makes, or like his interpretation of making art. That's what makes it expressionism. Now, they had many sources, but the most direct influence was surrealism because of that automatism, right? The emphasis on the creative power of the unconscious in the technique of automatism. That is that stream of consciousness, just not thinking about writing, not thinking about painting, just doing it. So Jackson Pollock, he combines automatism, which is like stream of consciousness creativity, with action painting, which is like basically gestural painting. It refers to a kind of abstract expressionism practiced by Jackson Pollock, and it emphasizes the act of painting, the artist's gesture in making art. So really, Jackson Pollock takes automatism and distills his whole painting process into the act of making the painting, to the point where watching Jackson Pollock paint is probably more important than the finished product. Now, the finished product is important, and if you see these in person, you will see they are the gesture is important, the layering of the paint is important. It's amazingly layered, and you really got to remember, nothing like this had been done before. Of course, now people can kind of emulate it, but before Jackson Pollock, this had never been done before, and so it was really, he painted thousands and thousands of these before he got one that the art world said, okay, now that's good, right? So I don't know. It's important to note, but really the important thing to take away is that it's the expressionism of his actions during painting, the gesture of his painting, the gestural painting. I guess, it's known as gestural painting. It's known as action painting because those are the important parts of it. Okay, so in any case, some other abstract expressionists we see coming out of New York, Willem de Kooning. Now, these are abstract, but they're really aggressively expressionist. Abstract depictions, conscious versus unconscious feelings towards women. They're really leaning into that whole deal that we'd already kind of seen some tension between male-female relations and the depiction of females with Picasso and Gauguin. But yeah, this abstract expressionist around making these really like loose, subconscious or unconscious like paintings of women, it really tells a lot. Real quick, I do want to talk about, I forgot, Jackson Pollock, just to highlight too, a lot of these artists go through a lot of tumult, and they're very serious about what they do, even if we sometimes roll our eyes and we're like, that's so simple. But these guys thought a lot about it. Jackson Pollock, there's a great movie about him with Ed Harris where he essentially kills himself. He drives off a cliff in a drunken episode, and he has lots of struggle with the societal acceptance of his work and popularity, but he wants to, I don't know, it's a big mess. And a lot of these guys, they just have a lot of psychological tumult. Like I said, they're almost like the post-impressionists, the Van Goghs and people like that we saw. Something I didn't say in the last chapter too is, remembering that Van Gogh died penniless. People never liked his work when he was alive, and yet these guys are going through a time where they're very liked, to the point of, well, they're very liked or disliked. Some people hate them, some people like them, but the popularity just grows. Now, in any case, pushing the non-objective side of abstract expressionism. And remember, abstract expressionism has abstract and non-objective. Jackson Pollock's non-objective. Now, the color field painters are a style of non-representational painting referred to, or it's featuring broad fields or areas of color. They're basically, color by itself is an element worth highlighting, right? That's content, right? Color alone, right? They're taking the Fauvist thing about inserting color as it's this element just to make things more interesting, and they're saying color alone is interesting enough to be a subject. It arises after abstract expressionism shares the movement's fondness for large scale and the desire to transcend the visible world. The whole point of a lot of these guys coming out of, the Jackson Pollock modernist movement and Rothko's color field paintings, the whole idea is that they don't want to depict anything, right? It's really reaching that Shariko metaphysical idea of nothing that we recognize from the world being in these paintings. That's why they're non-objective. But they transcend the visible world in favor of universal truths viewed as subconscious or spiritual, unconscious or spiritual. Whereas abstract expressionism, though, was dynamically emotional. Color-filled painting was meditative, tranquil, and it draws the viewer in and invites contemplation, right? Another thing to note, Mark Rothko also had a lot of identity issues, and he also died by suicide. These guys, they're really pushing themselves to new ideas. Right? It's a hard thing to imagine none of this existing before these, like living in a world where this doesn't exist, and they come up with it. But in any case, Rothko, these are the things that people see and they say, they spend enough time in front of these fields of color and they see God, and they feel spiritually transcendent and stuff. And it's all about the fact that there's nothing related to it in the world. It's just color, and it's absorbing, and it's big, and it's very cool. Now, that's color field painting. Some other color field artists include Louise Nevelson. We've looked at her many times before. She turns all of the objects into one flat color field, just a giant block of color. The ideas of abstract expressionism and color field painting in three-dimensional assemblage, right? It's the first time we see just taking random objects and put them together. Now, they haven't really coined the term yet, but in any case, yeah, Louise Nevelson, and then of course Helen Frankenthaler. A lot of people say color field wouldn't be color field without Frankenthaler. Rothko was very static, very straightforward. Helen Frankenthaler was really a bit more expressionist while still keeping it as simple as blocks of color. But those blocks of color had more gestalt. They had more gaps that were irregular. They had more asymmetry, or like balance that was not exact on each side. And hers actually also were kind of a bit of action painting as well, where the act of watching Frankenthaler paint was also, as important as seeing the finished product. And the way the colors mixed, all of these artists too, the way they mix their colors. Jackson Pollock and Rothko, I know specifically, were very unclear about some of the things that they were doing to their paint to make it have the finishes or the colors that they were seeing. And so, that's an important part of color field. But the big deal is that it's just color. There's nothing else. Now, as we get into the 60s, in the 1950s, there was a new Dadaist movement, the neo-Dadaists. Like the Dadaists 40 years later, artists like Rauschenberg and Jasper Johns began mixing art back up with life as they found it. Right, so throughout the 40s and 50s, Pollock and Rothko, they're all about this like a big transcending life idea, right? It's beyond what we know in life. And the neo-Dadaists, Rauschenberg and Johns, they're all about bringing life back to art, right? So they start doing this with assemblage. That's like a really big deal, the assemblage and happening. So that's putting together, a 3D collage. They do a lot of collage, just like the Dadaists did. I can't help but wonder how much the idea of bringing about Dadaists too is also because the Dadaists came out of World War I. These guys are coming a little after World War II. But in any case, Rauschenberg, the Winter Pool, Rauschenberg referred to his work as combining painting, as combine painting, I should say. That's a specific idea, but a more general term is assemblage. Combine painting is combining elements of the real world 3D and collage, but we call it assemblage when we talk about 3D collage. In any case, one thing worth noting too is that Johns and Rauschenberg both also began their careers as artists as window display artists, right? That's what they did for work prior to it. I think they had a pseudonym that they worked under, but in any case, I think it's cool to think about these assemblage artists who are just putting together 3D objects in their paintings. They were actually also window dressers, basically. I don't know. I think that's pretty cool. Now, in any case, another artist in this movement, John Cage, he's all about music and performance. The affirmation, an affirmation of life. Not art should be an affirmation of life, not an attempt to bring order out of chaos or to suggest improvements in creation, but simply a way of waking up to the life that we are living, the very life we are living. Right. Yeah, he was a composer, John Cage, and he did a lot of music. Jasper Johns, he's the guy that, was the window dresser like Rauschenberg. Oh, also Rauschenberg was famous for taking drawings that Willem de Kooning did and then erasing them and then reselling, like recreating. I don't know. It's pretty cool. I don't know the full story there, but I know that was a big splash that he did. It was very Dadaist to take a painting and then erase it. That's very much like Duchamp and the Dadaists that we saw in 21. In any case, Johns created this painting of a flag. One, I dreamt that I painted a large American flag. The next morning, I got up and went out and brought the materials to begin. Those materials included 3 canvases that he mounted on plywood strips of newspaper and in caustic paint. So this is a wax painting, the thick, heavy wax, a mixture of pigment and molten wax that formed on the surface. Form a surface of lumps and smears. Sorry, I'm doing terrible reading this. Newspaper scraps visible beneath the stripes and 48 stars lend to the iconic historical specificity. The American flag is something already in the mind, as John said, but its execution is complicated and represents, and the representation and invites, the American flag is already in our mind, but his execution of it complicates the representation and invites closer inspection. He's adding layers. He's adding complications. It's just a simple set of stripes and stars, but he decided to make it more complicated by using encaustic, by using collage, by doing things. Critics of the time encapsulated this painting's ambivalence, saying, is it a flag or is it a painting, right? That's what the whole idea of ambivalence is. It's just a thing from our everyday life, but then it's complicated. It's a painting. This artist taking his time to make a painting of such a simple thing. What is that? He also was known for these like bullseyes and some plaster casts of different like body parts that were all over these. It's very much like assemblage, mixed with color field, though, I think a little bit. But in any case, looking at the American flag, is it a painting? Is it a flag? It became, this is synonymous with a very like neo-Dadaist thing, like taking something simple, and this does eventually lead to pop art and stuff like that. But now I also want to note with the discussion of the flag, and again, I apologize for that horrible reading of that paragraph, but you can read it again on your own time. But in any case, after painting the American flag, the iconic American flag painting sold for $36 million in New York on Veterans Day 2014, setting an auction record. Robert Ryman, also working at the time, sells a painting of white paint on a white canvas for $15 million. Basically, I want to highlight that these artists, as we move to the 50s and 60s, they're working in a time where whether they want to or not, when collectors decide to collect, their pieces are going for millions of dollars. This is definitely not Van Gogh's time. This is commercial. Art is commercial in ways, and collectors get to decide who's worthwhile, who's worth putting millions behind, even if it seems reductive or ambivalent. They get to decide. And again, it goes beyond what the artist even intended in many ways. In any case, getting back to John Cage and talking more about the neo-Dadaists, suggested that art should move towards theater. John Cage suggested art should move towards theater. That is the art that's most like life, right? Theater is just a reenactment of life. Happenings were staged or directed occurrences, directed by artists and offered as art. It was coined in 1959, used widely during the 60s, and the term has generally now been replaced by performance art. I like to think of it as flash mobs. Happenings are a little bit more like flash mobs. Performance art can be a lot of things. Contemporary performance art is like videos and like really thought out like symbolic activities, ritualistic movements and stuff like that. But happenings were more open to spontaneity and often encouraged audience participation. So like I said, it's kind of like a flash mob. I like to talk about the women licking jam off a car from his happening household in 1964. This is just they covered the car in jam and the people licked it off. Pretty bizarre. James Tingley, an homage to New York. It's just like a self-destroying sculpture. It's a sculpture made out of trash that when turned on, it's just going to like create madness and chaos and eventually destroy itself. And again, John Cage was working in music, and it led to this like theatrical new form of art and happenings with Dadaism. Now, that commerciality part, that everyday object part of neo-Dadaism gets brought into the forefront with pop art. In the 60s and 70s, pop art is an art style deriving its imagery from the popular mass-produced culture of the time. Deliberately mundane, or banal is another word they like to use for it. Pop art focuses on the over-familiar objects of everyday life to give them new meaning as visual elements. So pictures of Elvis repeated, pictures of Marilyn Monroe repeated, pictures of the Campbell's soup can repeated, because these are regular things that we were seeing put in front of us every day. Andy Warhol, is kind of the main guy we think of with pop art, but it's all about popular image, right? That's where that comes from. Just repeating, I don't know, art that, he was all about the commerciality of it too. He basically, in a lot of interviews, I'm sure he was being cheeky, but he would just say, like, I just paint to be rich. I paint because people give me money. I think there was a famous art gallery where the art didn't end up on the walls in time, so he just like put some money up on the walls, right? Because he was like, that's what this is all about. It's all about commerciality. It's about popular image and playing with popularity, celebrity, and that whole collector critic side of the art world. Lichtenstein and other popular artists taking kind of comic strip ideas and then making art using that imagery, like old mythical, like Baroque scenes or Rococo scenes, but now they look like comic books. Brad Darling, this painting is a masterpiece. Soon you'll have all of New York clamoring for your work. Yeah, I don't care. I'd rather sink than call Brad for help. Right, it's like soap opera, Rococo. Like, I don't know. It reminds me of kind of like older artworks, but then done as comic books. It's wild stuff. Okay, after pop art, we get more abstraction and photorealism. Hard edge painting is a new type of color field painting. While pop artists turn their attention to imagery, other artists continue exploring non-representational art. So remember, non-representational is so abstracted, it doesn't look like anything anymore. One Direction is hard edge painting. Yeah, it's a color field painting where areas of flat color are separated by sharp, precise edges. It's very geometric in nature. It's much more organized and less organic than the Rothko, Frankenthaler color field, but they are color field paintings. They're just more organized. The cover of the book that I teach this from, I think the 12th edition, has a great big hard edge painting on it. But in addition to those extreme non-representational hard edge color field painters, we also have photorealism comes back. So basically, it's a type, it's referred to as superrealism. It's a movement in painting and sculpture of the 60s and 70s that it imitated the impersonal precision and minute detail associated with photography. Basically, painting so real you can't tell if it's photography anymore. Or if it's photography or painting. You can't even tell it's a painting anymore because it looks just like the real thing. This Ralph Goings, that's the one that blows my mind every time. Looks just like real life, but it's not. It's a painting. This is like a new movement. It's a new flex. Chuck Close is really well known for this like hyper reals, what is that the term? Super realism or photorealism. In the early days, he makes these monumental photoreal images of like portraits of people really up close. You can see, there's even reflections in the eyes, whatever was reflected in the picture that he's drawing from. Now, what's crazy though about Chuck Close is in his late 30s, he has a spinal injury, infection, deformation of some sort, and he becomes quadriplegic. And then over time, he does gain back some of the use of his arms. I think for a time he was even painting just like using his teeth, but now he actually has this whole apparatus. He can't really fully use his hands. He just like puts on like this gauntlet and he can kind of hold the painting, and he is in a wheelchair, and he has this whole thing that like tilts the painting and has this really like precise line on it, and you can see how he breaks it down. It's almost like grid painting, but then inside of it, since he doesn't have the control to do these really tight, precise details, he now does these repeated little circles. They're almost Kandinsky-esque, but inside of the little grid. And then when you step back, it becomes this insane photoreal depiction of the portrait. And all he does is portrait, and he'll do the same portrait more than a dozen times. It's amazing. He also has one of my favorite quotes that is, inspiration is for amateurs. The rest of us just show up and get to work. Great quote if you're an artist. You can't just sit around and wait to be inspired. Sometimes you got to just do it. In any case, Chuck Close's story is a very inspiring one coming out of the photorealism. Anyway, off of that, minimalism is a broad tendency during the 60s and 70s towards simple primary forms where the elements are restricted to the minimum: lines, simple shapes, and color. Minimalist artists often favored industrial material, or they really like to call them objects. Again, almost, I guess, based off poetic object, but this is just an object. It's not a painting. Tended to be set on the floor or attached to the wall rather than placed on pedestals. Dan Flavin and Donald Judd, they both have several pieces in the Fort Worth Modern. They're all about color, reflection, lighting, fluorescent lighting that's in different colors. Those are very cool Dan Flavin pieces. And the way that it reflects, like off the back, he might have another color, so it's like you're looking at a blue light, but you're seeing pink light behind it. I love that stuff. These industrial sort of chrome, very angular, like concrete, metal types of things. Simple shapes, simple forms, simple colors. Donald Judd, of course, has the Chihuly, or the Chinati Foundation. Chihuly is a different thing. Chinati Foundation down in Marfa, Texas. He has these hangars full of just objects, right? And then the concrete blocks just spread across the field at it. If you get a chance to visit Marfa, it's very well worth it. This is all about minimalist, right? Sculpture that has the bare minimum, almost like distill, right? Distill. Now, post-minimalism is in a narrow sense just means the generation after minimalists. Ava Hess, Richard Serra. There's a whole different, there's identity politics at play with these guys too. But in any case, they're representative of artists at that time, and in a broad sense, it means just the series of movements from 65 to 75. Really, when we talk about post-minimalism, it's kind of like expressionism. There's a bunch of movements in there, and they include process art, earthworks, conceptual art, performance, and installation. Can be summarized as work that is influenced by the aesthetic of minimalists or attempts to develop it. Post-minimalism, as well as minimalism, seem to correspond to the change from modernism to postmodernism, which we'll talk about in a minute. Therefore, it seems to be one of the important clues when we consider the arguments about art and site, installation, public art, all those things that are a part of postmodernism. Postminimalism refers specifically to artists who utilize minimalism. We've already said all that. In any case, it's a conceptual reference point from which to develop. It does not refer to a particular movement, but rather aesthetic tendencies. Basically, post-minimalism is an overarching idea, not the specific movements. Let's talk about the specific movements. Process art is art that emphasizes the process of making art, kind of like action painting or automatism. It's not about the predetermined composition or plan. It's about the concepts of change and transience elaborated in the works of artists like these here, Ava Hess, we see, and Linda Benglis. It's, like I said, it's like action art, but it's just a new level of it. It includes also, it's going to include performance art. It's going to include, we've looked at Janine Antone before, her posing and then being covered in rawhide, her having the blocks of lard and the blocks of chocolate. That's all very process oriented. It's art that's about what they did to make it rather than necessarily just the finished product. Okay. Bruce Nauman, he's an installation artist as well as a process artist. What's interesting is that Bruce Nauman, I think he was like 42 a couple decades ago, and he just decided to become a rancher, and now he's like a rancher in West Texas. The last art piece I saw from him was literally just a video of him digging a new fence post hole. It was pretty cool, actually. It was like a performance art piece of him just building a fence. It's pretty neat. But in the beginning, he was this installation artist who would build, like, he did this painted wallboard in fluorescence. It doesn't describe it. But basically, it's like, to see the art piece, you got to go into this tiny, like, claustrophobic set of two walls. And yeah, this kind of makes him popular. He also does these ones where he's like spinning and looking at camera, and he just shouts things as he spins. It's all about the performative nature and the process. This installation here, installation though, remember, is all about getting to interact with it. It fills a space. That's what Nauman really gets known for. Kai Guo Cheng. I'm sure I'm saying it wrong. Chiang. They create these installation spaces, that are, this is like the taxidermied animals in this weird like space filling formation. Now performance art becomes a big part of, it's like happenings, but the next level, right, where they plan them, and there's lots of ritualistic movements or kind of inexplicable. It's all about using the body to create like theatrics or scenes. But in any case, Marina Abramovich and Ule, they were this partnership. They did this performance art in Ponderabilia in Bologna, Italy, where basically you couldn't enter the gallery without passing between their two nude bodies. And after a while, of course, the police were called and put an end to it. Of course, it was Italy. I don't think they got in that much trouble, but it was enough that they had to stop it. These kind of performances are a big part. I think Abramovich has some where she's like, defeathering chickens or just butchering chickens. She also did a video or a movie called The Artist is Present, a very good documentary about Abramovich. And obviously, performance lends itself well to documentary. You can see some cool stuff. James Franco's in it. He cries. I think it's worth watching. And anyway, Abramovich and Ule, they're a big part of performance art. These things, using your body to set up scenes and either record, or it's all about, sometimes it's just recorded and people don't take place. They just witness the performance, or they can be a part of it. That's more like happening. Then, of course, we get land art, earthworks, or earth art. Works of art created at, for, or from natural sites, like reshaping the earth, rearranging natural elements. We've talked about these at length. Many earthworks from the set, like many earthworks from the 70s, Spiral Jetty by Robert Smithson, this one up here, which we've talked about a lot, and The Running Fence by Cristo, this one here. They combine the aesthetics of minimalism with the principles of conceptualism, the concept being nature, right? So it's minimalism. It's just a simple spiral made out of rock, but it's made out of rock from nature, and it's made in nature. It's a fence cutting through space. It's minimalism in nature, right? Painting, Stan Hurd basically painting with a field. Crop circles are like, in a way, earthworks, minimalist earthworks. Criso and Jean Claude working here too. Like more, this is like minimalism in nature versus this is minimalism with nature more so. Also art that's about nature, right? Photography that's about the natural elements. Okay, and then building off of that, that's installation and then earthwork. And now we'll talk about conceptual art. It's created according to belief that the essence of art resides in the idea, and that any physical realization or recording of this idea is secondary. The idea is what's important. The end product is just is there. It's a recording of it. It's not a style, but a way of thinking about art. We already did several slides about this. We talked about Joseph Kossuth's 1 and 3 chairs, right? It's only one chair, but it's also 3 chairs, because the definition of a chair, it is a chair in a way. The photograph of a chair, it is a chair, but it's really, at the end of the day, just one chair. So 1 and 3 chairs. 5 words in white neon. I don't know why I love that one too. Just making an image of words that describe themselves as an object. And then Sol LeWitt is really well known for, he would basically he would come up with an idea of how to make a piece of art, and then he would write down instructions, and then he would send them to another artist who would make it, right? So yeah, it was all about the concept, right? He would write the idea, he would write out how to execute it, and then the other artists would make it. So it's like, innate collaboration. This is Franklin Furnace, the wall drawing, square 14 inches, horizontally divided in equal parts, top half matte, bottom half glossy. Boom, done. Yeah, I'm sure this one here, Sol LeWitt's drawing 122, is all about the concept of those semicircles and the movements of the angles, right? It's all about the concept. We also talked about Baldessari and the paintings that he then, he barely showed, and then he chopped them up, burnt them, and buried them. Right? Those are all conceptual artworks. Of course, all art is conceptual to some degree, but those artworks really, the conceptual art highlights the fact that the idea is what's important. Now, we get into some new media. The video format, basically, film has been around for a while and performance art has been around for a while, so they start combining it. Joan Jonas uses the medium of film, often black and white, to examine human body, ritualistic movements, and the spaces that the body occupies. All the moves in Glass Puzzle were in relation to the real space or the space of the monitor. They're like miming, relating to the size of the screen or where the frame of the camera goes. It relates to the poses of women in photographs taken by E.J. Bullock, who photographed prostitutes in New Orleans at the turn of the century. So basically, making themselves look like they're in like windows, like prostitutes. I don't know, and it becomes this like ritualistic performance, in front of the camera. There's several art pieces. This looking at a video of a Buddha that's being, he's watching the video of himself being filmed, right? That kind of stuff. I don't know. It's all just about film. We looked at Guido van der Verve and some of the videos. If you looked at the videos that I put into the film section in the photography chapter, standing at the North Pole and just like watching the sun, because the sun never sets. You just go in a circle if you face the sun, right? Now, in any case, as we move into the late 80s and 90s, we also get a reconsideration of craft, where clay and fibers actually begin to be a part of abstract expressionism. They begin to be a part of the avant-garde. That's an important development as well. We already saw Bauhaus brought craft into the fold, but now it becomes, high art. Feminism and feminist art obviously starts to take its place. This is Judy Chicago. I wish I could remember what year it is. But in any case, Judy Chicago in the 70s or 80s, she has this dinner party, right, where she invites many famous like feminist figures, and the idea is that she invites them. I'm sure it wasn't a literal dinner, but each place setting has some like really specific female oriented imagery that kind of highlight the power of women. If they were at the seats of power. Now that's Judy Chicago. Femage is a new type of decorative collage, including textile art. Is traditionally produced by it's art that is typically produced by women, but now it's being taken to make collage, assemblage that is feminist, right? It's pushing the boundaries. This piece here, Your Gaze Hits the Side of My Face. It's about the male gaze. It's about the ideas of women wanting more representation in the art world. There's more to come on that. Art since the 80s now. The term postmodern was first used to describe architecture that emphasized playfulness, curiosity, and eccentricity. Refers to the contemporary style of architecture that often draws from classical and historical sources to provide decoration, but they don't use it to provide the formal. It provides ornamentation. It opposes formal simplicity, though. Okay, basically it's art that is not like all about the facade. It's not about the arch. It's not about symmetry. It's about playfulness. It's about oddness, imbalance, asymmetry. We looked at it in the architecture section. We talked about Frank Gehry. We talked about Renzo Piano. Here we have Charles Moore's Dancing House. No. Sorry, it's actually Frank Gehry's Dancing House with Milunik. And then this is the Piazza d'Italy in New Orleans. This is Charles Moore here. I don't know. Basically, it's about everything looking different angles. It's modernizing architecture, and the term postmodern gets applied to this modernization of. Oh yeah, here's another Renzo Piano piece here. It's just about. Again, that lack of symmetry. It's maybe inspired by history, but it gets into playfulness. It gets into eccentricity, right? Now, that is what kicks off modernism. But modernism moves. It becomes something new, and it's also. In many ways, we argue it's the movement of now, so it's hard to really define. But modernism is a reaction against the modernist formalism, which is viewed by postmodernists as oppressive, sterile, and elitist. Modernist promotes the notion that there is no such thing as progress in art. Okay, that's the big one. There's no progress. All art is just happening as it happens. Modernism offers a more complex view of history and embraces pluralism as well. And this is important because it basically tears down all that stuff that I was trying to like make a timeline in art history, like trying to set up like this led to this world was doing this. All that stuff in a way, it's how we understand it, and it makes it easy to teach and break down. But the reality is that art, going off after this definition of pluralism, it's the idea that art can take many directions at the same time. All of them are equally valid. It's not like there's just the one trendy thing and that's all that's happening. There's other parts of the world. There's unrepresented people groups. There's just artists that are not recognized yet, right? All of them are working at the same time sometimes. Feminism has clearly showed that within art history, as it was usually told, there are other histories that are untold. But that's also true of, when we look at, like I said, throughout those chapters on Islam, Asia, the Pacific, America, there are stories, people building pyramids at the same time as the Egyptians that we don't recognize, or we didn't really appreciate until the last few decades, because they didn't fit into that neat little timeline of art history that we like to create. Basically realizing that the Mayans had a written language a whole world away from the rest of the Mesopotamian Mediterranean world. That's really important to start recognizing that. That's pluralism. Art history was not a straightforward progression of one style to another as it had been made to seem. Each historical movement was full of multiple directions, contradictions, and debates. It recognizes that there is no longer any single leading artistic center. Every part of the world has its own artistic leading center. That's another new development. It's not just about New York. There's also Britain, France, Iran, Nigeria, China, Japan, it's, you name it, Russia, rather the world of art consists of many centers and many levels. Postmodernism is all about this. This is what cracks this idea open. It offers something for everyone by accommodating a wide range of styles, subjects, and formats, from traditional easel painting to installation, from abstraction to illusionistic scenes. It's everything. That's why Thomas Kincaid can be put in a modern art museum if we decide that that's going to happen, right? In any case, some things that come out of this, some shift, just a few more slides talking about appropriation refers to the postmodern practice in which one artist reproduces an image created by another artist, right? This has already been a thing, but when we do it in postmodernism, we are really conscious of we're really conscious of tying it back to that person, the appropriation. It's the artist recycling existing images. It's art about art, which we've talked about before. Sherry Levine doing this gilded version of the fountain. Sherry Levine reshooting Walker Evans images, right? It's a whole new thing, right? To take art and make art that is like standing that art. That's an intentional movement now. The painterly image also returns with painters like Anselm Kiefer. This is neo-expressionism. Anselm Kiefer is one of my favorites. Spectacular. Lots of pieces by him in the Fort Worth Modern. But neo-expressionism refers to German and Italian artists who come to maturity in the post-World War II era. Neo-expressionism is characterized by intense color, unconventional materials, and turbulent composition. It is very turbulent. And I would say intense color, but Kiefer is like kind of muted colors. But he's also got like giant sunflowers stuck to them. I think he also, at some point, it's important to know about Kiefer that he is a German who lived through World War II, and he was a German citizen, right? But he's not like a Jewish German. He wasn't put in a concentration camp. He lived through it, right? And in some ways, it's coming to the grips with the idea that, like, as German citizens, a lot of German society benefited at different times from what was happening, whether they knew about it or not. It's a whole new tumultuous thing, and it's important too because Italy is also a part of supporting the Nazis, supporting fascism. So these artists are reacting to it in their own new form of expressionism. It recalls the sincerity and emotional intensity of the early expressionist movements of the early 20th century. So those post-impressionists and things, but it's more sober. And Kiefer even does an image of the inside of some of the Nazi like government buildings and stuff. It's pretty well. That's a postmodern movement. Another postmodern artist who I don't think necessarily belongs to a movement, but Jean-Michel Basquiat. He's a New York artist who gets his start as a graffiti artist. Basically, what we see is graffiti artists being recognized. Right? We get Shepard Fairey, we get Basquiat. These guys they start out. I think Sambo was his original name as a graffiti artist, but he starts to get recognized. They start wanting to say they want to see him make contemporary art. So he does this mix of in Hollywood Africans, which is about him going to uh, LA and like learning about African culture there and what's different from New York African culture. And he hangs out a lot with rappers and they talk about gangsterism. He really breaks down, African American history, but he does it with this mix of drawing, painting, symbols, text. It's all about kind of rudimentary drawing. Is it like old African drawing, is it that too reductive? Or is it like graffiti, or is that too reductive? Is it contemporary? Is it expressionist? Right? All these things come to play. He does actually die far too young, and unfortunately, we never really get to see the full fruition of this. But his art did make a big splash in the 80s and 90s, and this kind of leads to those words with images. We get more poetry introduced into visual art. We get more identity issues. We get more political issues. Right, writing in art tells a new story. Right, we've already looked at collage and how it, I don't know, it changes our way of looking at things, and then you can put words on top of that, and it changes it even more so. Um, yeah, and just the identity behind that. That's modernism or postmodernism. Now, of course, too, I wanted to talk a little bit more about feminist art. The Guerrilla Girls are a group of graffiti artists, or like kind of like performance artists. They evolved shortly after the opening of an exhibition at the New York Museum of Modern Art, the MoMA, in '85, and it's a reaction to the common practice of concentrating attention on white male artists while ignoring women and minority artists by critics, museums, and galleries. Basically, waking up to, again, identity in relation to who's being highlighted as an artist. Erase discrimination. This eraser from the Guerrilla Girls, and then also this awesome piece. Do women have to be naked to get into the Met? Less than 5% of artists in the modern art section are women, but 85% of the nudes are female. Definitely a statement worth noting. Now, more new media. We have the internet becoming a new form of making art. This awesome like website made by Olia Lialina, about her boyfriend coming back from war. It's the boyfriend came back from war at one of the first ever engaging hypertext net art narratives, in which the story of an awkward conversation of the couple trying to reconnect after having been separated by the Persian Gulf War. Her boyfriend serving in the military there. Users caused the conversation to unfold by clicking in the text, clicking images, text in various size windows within the frame. Right, you basically make different parts of the conversation happen. The low speed of early internet causes the frames to load slowly and haltingly, makes it tentative and painful. Exchange full of silence, right? It's using the internet as it was to create a new modern piece of art. We also have some digital art here, more film. Bill Viola, The Greeting, 1995. It's a 45-second encounter on a high-speed camera. When projected at a normal rate, it produces the illusion of a perfectly smooth, slow motion. It's transferred to high-definition digital video. It lasts 10 minutes. So 45 seconds spread over 10 minutes. These three women just saying, hey, just interacting. And then putting that next to this painting of The Greeting. It's the Visitation, Mary and Elizabeth, the mothers of John the Baptist and Jesus, greeting each other, right? In this ancient, I wouldn't say ancient, it's a Renaissance artist painting, right? And it's, I don't know, just a reflection of this slow motion meeting of modern women. It's very cool. We also have, some more digital art here. Digital drawing is something we can get even more, but I'm trying to kind of limit it to getting up to about the 2000s. Now, Terry Winters here. Taking the digital realm as a subject, Winters search for a way to express and paint the visible, unquantifiable, overwhelming, abstract entity that has become central reality of our time: information. right? The Twitterverse, the Instaverse, the Facebookverse. I don't know. Yeah, this is early days of talking about how the internet and the web of complex interactions that it creates, how it affects information, and how that should affect art. It's art about that. In any case, yes, this basically brings us up to contemporary. That ends chapter 22. Chapter 23, I do want to talk about globalization is an intensified awareness that the world is being woven into a single place economically and culturally, a sensation reinforced on the most intimate level by the computer, the internet, social media, the World Wide Web, all that stuff. Globalization is important. Now, these artists, I'd rather you probably just take your textbook and read through them. Each edition of the book is going to have a different version of this chapter 2 because it has more new stuff, but the version I have talks about some of these artists. This is Shoei Bari talking about being in like the English gentry while having Nigerian descent. The junior and most populous order of chivalry in Britain and the other Commonwealth honors. He basically gets to join a gentry order as a Nigerian immigrant. That's pretty cool. There's some interplay of the wars in the Middle East being basically just check out your book for highlights about these artists, about some of the tragedies, the terrorist attacks that are happening in the Middle East, and basically Middle Eastern artists getting their voice back as the global art world gets a better look at them. I'm not really looking to dig into all of this last chapter. I'm just kind of zooming quickly through video games becoming a part of art, Asian culture, Chinese artists getting to be a part of the global scene. We already talked about Ai Weiwei and other artists that are working currently. Repetition, new forms of color field, new forms of abstract expressionism, new forms of changing our perspective on things, new forms of installation. Installation art is a big one. In terms of modern art scenes, this one's really cool. The way that each one of these like tangled masses is, with the shadow is a cursive letter put on the floor. In any case, this paper reconstruction of the giant computers of the late 20th century. It's just made of paper though. It was destroyed very quickly. It's just a paper reconstruction. Jenny Saville is a British artist making art about the body, talking about in-betweenness, right? Hermaphroditic, transvestites, carcass, half dead, half alive things, right? People with deformities, people with physical differences, and highlighting them in a form of kind of impressionist art that she is doing. Again, this is all modern. Using the figure in terms of performance art here in both of these. Talking about Chinese politics here in this piece about the population in China. Again, read more about these by looking in your book. I just wanted to cap off this by kind of, again, chapter 23 cover by reading the chapter in Living with Art by Mark Getlein. But I want to read this final quote to end this video. We are humming out the same tune without realizing it, connecting to a community that is bigger than we know. We are different and yet together, all living with art. And that is the end of this video. Okay. That's all. I hope you enjoyed this breakdown of chapter 22, and a little quick summary of chapter 23. It all made it through in one part. I appreciate you. Let me know if you have any questions. The slides are on your classroom. Thanks.